everyone. In previous videos, we have discussed about anemophily and hydrophily, where the pollinating agents were wind and water respectively. In this video, we are going to talk about entomophily. Okay, so entomophily is a method of pollination in flowering plants where the pollinating agent is insect. Okay, that means the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of another plant of the same species is done with the help of insects. Now, if these insects are supposed to come and sit on the flower in order to transfer these pollen grains, so these insects must be rewarded by these flowers. Okay, in one or the other way, these insects must be rewarded by these flowers. So these flowering plants, they actually poses certain adaptations in order to attract insects towards them, okay, for the process of pollination. So let's see these adaptations. The first adaptation is all these flowering plants which are actually, pollinated by insects, they are brightly colored, okay. So this is a very important adaptation. All these flowering plants which are pollinated by insects are brightly colored, okay, because this bright color, it actually attracts the insects from far away, okay. If the insect is present at quite long distance, so this insect, because of the bright color of the flower, can easily notice the flower, okay, and hence go towards it, okay, and hence go towards it in in order to get some reward from the flower, okay. But it's not compulsory that in all these flowers only the petal will be the colored part, okay. There are different parts of the flower, different parts of the plant which can be colored in order to attract insects. So one example is in bougainvillea, okay. In bougainvillea, this is a very common ornamental plant, okay. So in bougainvillea, actually the flower is very small and inconspicuous and pale yellow in color, okay. Small and inconspicuous. Inconspicuous means not easily noticeable. If somebody is present at quite long distance or few feet away from the plant, so the person or maybe the insect will not be able to notice this flower properly, okay. And this flower is small, inconspicuous and pale yellow in color, okay. But the bract of this flower, okay, bract means the perianth of this flower is actually a colored part, okay. The perianth of this flower or the bract of the flower is brightly colored. So so in this plant, this is the bract which is brightly colored, and this bract actually attracts the insect towards it, okay. The flower is enclosed, or you can say it is very small, inconspicuous and present within these bracts. So this one is actually a very small flower, okay, and this pink color leaf-like structure is the bract of the flower, okay. So this colored bract attracts the insect for the process of pollination, and as the insect comes closer to this plant, the insect might notice these flowers and sit on it in order to suck the nectars. The next adaptation is, there are some plants in which instead of the flower, the leaves of the flower are colored, okay. The leaves of the flower are colored, okay. So one example of such plant is Euphorbia cyathophora, okay, Euphorbia cyathophora. Now you can notice here, this green color structure is actually the flower, okay. This green color structure is the flower, okay. And just below this inflorescence, okay, just below this inflorescence, the first layer of leaves are present, okay. So some part of this first layer of leaf are actually bright orange in color, okay, bright orange in color. Some part of leaves just below the cluster of this flower are bright orange in color, okay. So this bright orange color of this leaf actually attracts insects for the process of pollination, and once insects comes closer to this plant, the insect can easily notice the flower. Next example is Musanda, okay. Musanda is actually the name of a genus, and there are different species of this plant, okay. So in Musanda, instead of flower, the sepals of the flowers are colored. Okay. Here also the flower is very small and inconspicuous. So in Musanda also the flower is small and inconspicuous. Okay, small and inconspicuous. But here the sepals are the colored part of the flower, and from long distance these colored sepals, they actually attract the insect towards it. Okay, so you can see here this is one species of Musanda. Okay, in this the sepals are like, bright pink in color, light pink in color, and the flowers are very small and inconspicuous, and it is yellowish in color flower. And this is the second species of Musanda where the sepals are bright magenta in color. Okay, and the flowers are pale yellow. Okay, so in Musanda, sepals of the flower are colored part. Second adaptation, second adaptation of these flowering plants in order to attract insects is that these flowers produce a scent. Okay, these plants, they produce a strong fragrance. Okay, they produce a strong fragrance in order to attract these insects. Okay, so examples are like night blooming flowers, that is jasmine and rafflesia. Okay, we all know jasmine. Commonly it is also called mogra, and in Hindi it is also known as chameli. Okay, so this jasmine flower produces a very nice fragrance out of it, which actually attracts insects, which actually attracts moth during the night time for the process of pollination. And this is rafflesia. Rafflesia is one of the largest flower found on the earth of any angiosperm, and this rafflesia produces a very strong smell of rotten meat. Okay, rotten meat or rotten flesh. Okay, so some of the insects, they are highly attracted towards this smell of rotten meat or flesh, and these insects, they help in the pollination of this rafflesia. Next adaptation is that these flowers must be conspicuous. Okay, conspicuous means easily visible, or you can say easily noticeable. Okay, so these flowers must be conspicuous. Okay, and if the flowers are very small in size, so these flowers must be present in clusters, so that they can all together, they can look bigger in size and can be easily visible for the insects. Okay, one of the example is the capitulum of sunflower. Now when we look at sunflower, we think that this is one flower of the sunflower. Okay, this is one flower of this plant. Okay, but actually if we look closer, this entire structure or this entire setup is known as capitulum of sunflower. This capitulum of sunflower is actually having two types of flower in it. One type of flower is known as ray floret or ray flower. So this ray flower is having a long and thin a very long and thin petal. Okay, brightly colored petal. Okay, and the second type of flower is known as disc flower or disc floret. Okay, the smaller one. Okay, so these ray florets are arranged on the sides. Okay, on the corners. You can see here these ray florets or the ray flowers, they are arranged on the corner here. Okay, on the sides. Okay, and all these disc florets here in the center, they are arranged here in the center. Okay, so both these ray floret and the disc floret, okay, on the top they have this stigma, then this is style, okay, and in the center at the bottom they have ovary. Okay, stigma, style and ovary. Okay, similarly this ray floret is also having stigma, style and ovary. This is the ovary. Okay, so if the flowers are actually smaller in size, they should be present in cluster, and one example is capitulum of sunflower. These flowers must be conspicuous. Okay, next adaptation is some flowers, they actually produce edible pollen grains. Okay, so these insects or other animals which help in the process of pollination, these insects, they actually consume most of the pollen grains. So they come and sit on the flower in order to get food from the flower. Okay. Now what happens is most of the pollen grains are actually consumed by these insects, but still some of the pollen grains are like, left on the body of the insect, like maybe on the feet or on the wings. Okay. So what happens is this insect, when from male flower, it flies to the female flower, and when it sits on the female flower, the insect might transfer, or it actually transfers some of the pollen grains on the top of stigma of the female flower. Okay. And the example of such plant is pepperwort and Rosa sinensis, the common rose plant. Okay. The next adaptation is these flowers, which are supposed to be pollinated by insect, they must produce nectar and contain nectar glands as well as nectaries. Okay. And one of the best example for this is Antirrhinum. Antirrhinum is commonly known as snapdragon. So this is actually your snapdragon plant. Okay. What happens in such plant is, for example, this is the thalamus. Okay. Here you have this petals. Okay. In the center you have stigma, style and ovary. The pistil is present, and then you also have the stamen, anther and filament. Okay. Now at the bottom of this petal, I mean the part where these petals are attached to the thalamus. Okay. Or you can see like, at the bottom of these filament, there are some glands which are called nectar gland. Okay. And these nectar gland, they actually produce a sweet liquid which is called nectar. Okay. So nectar is a sweet liquid produced by these angiospermic flowers, which are supposed to be pollinated by insects. Okay. And when an insect comes near this flower, so this insect actually from outside, this insect doesn't know that at the bottom of this stamen, the nectar glands are present where sweet liquid is there. Okay. So in order to guide these insect towards the nectar gland, there are certain guidelines. Okay. Or small, very small fiber-like structures, fiber or hair-like structures present on the petal. Okay. And these are known as nectaries. Okay, they are called nectaries, or you can say like, nectar guidelines. Okay, or this can also be called nectar guidelines. Okay. Now, once this insect enters inside this petal, it goes deep down and, try to suck the nectar from this gland. And while sucking the nectar from this gland, the pollen grains from this anther falls on the insect's body, or this insect, rub against this stamen. And these the pollen grains attaches to the body of insect. And when insect comes out of this flower, it goes in the search of another flower of the same species, obviously, because the insect is actually looking for the nectar. Okay. And while entering inside the another flower, insect drops the pollen grain on the stigma of that particular flower. Okay. So this is how the presence of nectar or nectaries actually help in the proper pollination by the insect. There are some special adaptations of certain plant. Okay. One of the example is Ophrys plant or Ophrys flower. Okay. The flower of Ophrys plant. Now the flower of this Ophrys plant is actually having one of the petal which is similar to the moth. Okay. It actually looks like a female moth. Okay. Female moth. It actually, one of the petal of Ophrys flower actually resembles a female moth. Now this male moth actually, come and, come and get attracted to this flower by thinking that this is a female moth, and the male moth comes and sits on this flower for the process of copulation. Okay. For the process of copulation. And this type of copulation, like, in which, because obviously this is a petal and it's not a real female moth. So this type of copulation is known as pseudo copulation. So pseudo copulation means false copulation. Okay. So when insect comes and sits on this flower, the pollen grains of this particular flower gets attached to the body of the moth. Okay, and this moth flies and goes to the another flower. That another flower could be a female flower, and then insect drops its the pollen grains stuck on its body onto the stigma of that next flower. Okay, so in such plant like office plant, the flower, one of the petal of the flower resembles the female moth, which attracts the male moth for the process of copulation. Another special adaptation can be seen in some of the plants like yucca. Okay, yucca flower. Okay, so this yucca flower is actually pollinated by yucca moth. Okay, and the scientific name of this yucca moth is Pronuba eucacella. Okay, Pronuba eucacella. You can check here. This is actually a typical yucca flower. Okay, this is yucca flower. Okay, and here these are the yucca moth. Okay, yucca moth. Okay, this is a closer look of this flower. You can notice here in the center you actually have this fused stigma. Okay, style, and then at the bottom we have ovary. Okay, and here you have anther and filament. Okay, anther and filament. So stigma, style, ovary in the center, and on the sides we have this anther and filament. Okay, and the pistil in the center. Okay, now the relationship of this yucca flower and this yucca moth is actually mutual relationship. Mutual relation. Okay, this yucca flower and yucca moth alone without each other, they cannot survive. Okay, it's not possible for them to survive alone without each other. Okay, they actually have this mutual relationship between them. I'll explain you how. Actually, the pistil of every flower is having three parts: stigma, style, and ovary. Okay, now this Pronuba moth helps in the pollination of this yucca flower. So this Pronuba moth moves from one flower to the another flower in the search of food, and the pollen grains of this yucca flower stick to the body of this yucca moth. Okay, or Pronuba moth. Okay, now one of the very important stage in the life cycle of every insect is laying of eggs. Okay, now these insects must have a safe place in order to lay eggs. Okay, now how this yucca moth is adapted, this yucca moth actually drills a hole in the ovary of this yucca flower. Okay, so this yucca moth, what it will do, it will drill a hole in the ovary of yucca flower. Okay, and it lays its egg there in the ovary of yucca flower. And once it lays its egg there in the ovary of yucca flower, it will seal this particular hole. Okay, so that no other organism can come and consume its egg. Okay, so it will seal these organisms. It will seal this hole. Okay, with the help of the pollen grains. And these pollen grains are actually from the same species. Okay, now these pollen grains they will start germinating. Okay, these pollen grains will start germinating because they are present inside the ovary. Okay, and we know that inside ovary we have ovules. So these pollen grains will reach the ovule, or inside ovule we have female gamete. Okay, female gamete. So these pollen grains will reach this ovule, and the male nucleus or male nuclei present inside the pollen tube will fuse with the female gamete. And this is how the process of pollination and fertilization actually completes in this yucca flower. And these eggs, okay, the eggs which are present inside the ovary will actually hatch, and they will obtain their nutrients. Okay, they will obtain their nutrients from the cells of this ovary. Okay, we have studied about the nucellus. Nucellus are actually highly nutritive cells present inside the ovary, which actually provides nourishment to the developing female gametophyte or developing embryo. Okay, so these eggs will hatch. The small caterpillars or larvae will come out of these eggs. Okay, and these larvae will start feeding on the cells of these ovary. Okay, and pollen grains will germinate. and this male nucleus will go and fertilize the female gamete. So this is how the survival of this yucca moth and yucca flower is dependent on each other. In this case, the yucca moth delivers pollen grain, or it will actually transfer pollen grain directly inside the ovary instead of transferring it on the stigma of the pistil. Okay, so this relationship is mutual because they both can survive only in the presence of each other. Alone, they cannot survive in the nature. The similar type of example can also be found in another plant which is known as Amorphophallus. Okay, Amorphophallus. Here, this flower is actually, the height of this flower is almost 6 feet. 6 feet. Okay, and this flower is also pollinated with the help of insects, and these insects they drill hole in the ovary of this Amorphophallus flower. A very commonly named vegetable is available in the market, which is called jamikand. Okay, jamikand we call it in Hindi. Okay, so this jamikand is actually the root of this flower, and it is consumed as a food. Okay, so this jamikand is actually this Amorphophallus plant. This is the flower of jamikand. Okay. So we are done with entomophily. In next video, we are going to discuss about another modes of pollination like ornithophily, pterophily, etc. Okay. Take care till then. Bye-bye.